Sometimes you hear really great things about a lake and you show up brimming with confidence, but it doesn't always pan out. We're going to talk about a recent trip I just got back from on this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast. I'm Chad LaChance, and you're listening to Fishful Thinker, the podcast. All things fishful, all the time. Hey guys, Chad LaChance here. Thanks as always for tuning into this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast, brought to us by the fine folks at Sportsman's Warehouse. Visit them at sportsmans.com or any one of 140 plus stores nationwide. And don't forget about the good folks at Peterson Toyota in Fort Collins, Colorado. They're outdoorsmen, good friends of mine, and they will take care of you like no other dealership. So guys, speaking of that, I just got in my Toyota Tundra and I drove 300 miles based on a tip I got from a biologist that manages a lake. And I've been known to do that a lot. We've filmed 360 or whatever TV shows so far, and a lot of times I'll chase down a tip, and almost always it pans out, but not always. And this particular road trip that I just got back from was unfortunately full of lessons. And that's a nice way to put it. And the reason I wanted to talk about on this podcast is not about this particular lake. It's about some fundamental fishing concepts. It's about confidence. It's about expectations. It's about equipment. It's about a lot of things that really just combine to make for a final outcome that really wasn't what I expected. Let's just put it that way. And so I want to back up a little bit with some backstory. First off, I don't read fishing reports. I'm not a fan of fishing reports. I don't care how everybody else is catching them or not catching them. It's just not my MO, because what I know on any given day, one guy's experience will be completely different than the other guy's experience. And depending on whose fishing report you read, you're going to be, either really happy or not really happy to go to such and such lake. And so I don't read fishing reports. The one thing I do read is conditions reports. So I want to know how high the water is or how low it is. Is it moving one direction or another? What's the temperature doing? What's the weather for the few days prior to me going there doing? Things like that. Those are the things I want to know. I don't care that, hey, what are they hitting on such and such lake? Or I was just there and caught 72 trout and oh geez. I don't care, because over the course of a day, the morning bite may be better than the evening bite. The one guys have a completely different skill set than the other guys. They're just not reliable. So I just as soon tune them out in the same way that I do pretty much any other version of quote unquote news. And I won't go into all that, but long story short, I don't read, listen, or hear anything to do with news that isn't directly in front of me. That's a whole nother thing. Fishing reports, I feel like, are erroneous information most of the time, same as the news. Now, I do believe when a biologist gives me some information on the population dynamics in a lake, that maybe that's worth investigating. And I was at a lake in Kansas, and the managing biologist was there by coincidence. I just ran into him at the boat ramp, and I always talk to those guys. Anybody from any of the management agencies I see, I will always talk to them, because a lot of guys give them a hard time, but at the end of the day, they only got into that line of work because they love fisheries. Nobody got in to be a fisheries biologist because he wants to get rich, and nobody got in to be a park ranger or a CPW officer or anything else. Nobody got into any of those because they want to get rich. For that matter, hosting fishing TV shows. That's not because you want to get rich. It's a labor of love. It's a passion you have. And so I will always talk to those guys or girls if at all possible. So I saw his truck at the boat ramp, went over, introduced myself, pick his brain a little bit about the lake I'd just gotten off of. And he was very nice. And so when we were talking about what was going on and what I do and this, that, and the other, he says, man, we got this little lake in western Kansas that you really ought to go check out. I said, why? What's the deal about it? What's the deal about it? Well, first of all, it's spring fed. It's constant level lake. It doesn't hardly change. He said it'll move up and down a couple inches, which is very rare for reservoirs that I normally get to fish. And this is technically a reservoir because it is dammed, but there's no river. It's just spring fed. And he just gave me a bunch of unique things about it. But he also told me it was full of Eurasian milfoil that had gotten in there. and that the largemouth bass were doing really well because of it. And that is an invasive species. It's cooties. At the end of the day, it's cooties for your boat. It's not something that should be spread around. And I'll tell you right off the bat, it's really good for fish, but it sure makes it hard on fishing. And having just gotten back from a lake that was loaded with the stuff, and I fished it before, so I knew what I was getting into. Not the lake, but Eurasian milfoil. I knew he was going to be in for a little bit of that, and sure enough, it's in your trolling motor all the time, it's in the big motor all the time, it's caught in the shallow water anchors all the time. It can be a nightmare to fish around. And people that aren't fishermen really don't like this stuff because it just fills in their lake, and it's just not a good thing to have in your lake, and with the possible exception of being a largemouth bass, who love it. So it had milfoil in it, which right off the bat makes me think, okay, that's potentially good. It's spring fed and the springs run year round. Okay, so that's good. We're going to have a consistent water supply and probably consistent temperatures, which anytime you have consistent in a sentence with fishing, that's a good sign. And then we also looking at the fact that it had a big number of shad that had recently gotten in there, and the biologist was worried about that the shad would overpopulate in the long run and the lake would actually turn the other way around. So here's the crux of the whole thing. He had put fish traps for years. He had been putting fish traps, electrofishing, gill netting, in other words, all the sampling stuff that they do at a lake to have an accurate description of the population. And his data was coming back that, hey, this is a really good bass lake, like a really good bass lake. And lots of healthy fish in the 2 to 4 pound range, potential for fish considerably bigger than that, and all of them very healthy and well fed and this, that, and the other. And he's like, every time I sample there, it's so good, I just can't believe it. Now here's the thing. He's like, the problem is the fishing reports and the creel surveys from the park rangers and the park managers and the other biologists that worked with Kansas on evaluating things like that had come back saying, no, fishing here is horrible. Nobody's catching anything. And biologists lamented that, hey, I've done my job. I've built a fantastic fishery here over the last 20 years. It's got some great largemouth and some great saugeye and some big crappies in it, and it's a small little lake, and it's not my fault nobody can catch them. And it would be great if you, Mr. LaChance, would go to this lake, catch some of these fish on film, and maybe educate some people about how to go about catching them. So my giant ego swelled up, my head got all big, my hat got tight, talking to that biologist. Well, yes, sir, Mr. Biologist, I'll do just that. I'll show these people how to fish that lake. You probably already know where this is going. I got in the truck, we drove the Tundra out there, pulled the Big Ranger boat, even though it's only a 160-acre lake, put the boat in the water, and I started looking around, and within, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes of idling around looking at it, and again, it's only 160 acres, I had a small bit of panic in the back of my throat and was trying to figure out, now wait a minute, this might be a lot harder than I thought. Why? Because the whole lake, the deepest water anywhere in it's 15 feet deep, and the only reason the fish can survive is because it's spring fed all the time and doesn't freeze, especially given all that milfoil, which would die and cause a die-off in the wintertime if it froze over and got a winter kill. So when I started looking around, I'm like, wait a minute, there is no limitations to where these fish can be. They can be anywhere they want. And when I'm trying to mark fish in a lake that's only 15 feet deep using your electronics, that's hard too, because you don't have any range with your electronics. So, and when I say it's only 15 feet deep, I mean in 1/4 acre spot did I see that it exceeded 10. Almost all of it was somewhere between about 2 feet and 5 feet deep, with the majority of it being 3 or 4 feet deep, meaning that any of the species of fish I already named can be anywhere they want, in that milfoil or just out in the open water. They have access to bottom structure all over the place. And oh, by the way, the entire bottom of the lake is almost flat. And I mean flat. I'm a Florida guy. I understand flat. It was flat. And no drop-offs, no humps, no ridges, no nothing. Just a big flat bottom on this lake that sloped up evenly to the shorelines, and then the overwhelming majority of it was rimmed with cattails. So right away, I'm like, okay, there are miles of cattails There's no offshore structure of any kind. The milfoil is on the upper end of the lake is too thick to get a boat in. And therefore, this could be challenging. Well, long story short, after basically a day and a half of fishing a 160-acre lake in a big old Ranger boat with every tool known to man, I boated a grand total of about a dozen bass. And they were very average from what he said we would likely catch. In other words, fish from 2 to 4 pounds. So how did that happen? Why did that happen? Let's talk about that. First of all, as I already mentioned, this is not a lake that's going to be easy to narrow down where to fish. There's not a big giant, drop off we need to be looking at. Water temperature was somewhere between 69 and 71 degrees everywhere we went, meaning that it's a perfect temperature. Fish can go anywhere they want. They can be high in the water column, low in the water column. The vegetation that was in there was dying off in some areas, which would give me a little bit of a chance to narrow it down. But ironically, the areas that I ended up catching the fish have significant amounts of the dying off vegetation, which is generally not something you want to end up fishing around. So the book was out the window right off the bat. And so I really started getting creative and saying, okay, there's a bunch of hardwood cover that the biologists put in here, bunches of it, bunch of cedar trees, things like that. Well, I fished maybe 15 patches of that and got no positive reinforcement from largemouth at all, a couple of crappies. Didn't mark saugeyes anywhere. Still to this day have no idea where the saugeyes in that lake are. And I'm running high-end graphs. I've got live, active target or live scope, whatever you want to call it. I've got side scan, down scan, the whole 9 yards. And I never marked anything that told me saugeye in that lake. I have no idea where they are. But keep in mind that when you're in 4, 5, 6 feet of water, you don't mark fish very much because you're only looking at 1 foot to 2 foot at the bottom. And even the side scanners don't have any range. Your active target or your live imaging doesn't have any range. So it became tricky. So I gave up on the saugeyes pretty quick when I looked at everything that I thought might remotely be holding them and found none of them. Then I didn't even try to fish for those very much. I did a little bit, and we'll get back to that. I decided that largemouth was going to be my best bet. That's probably my strength as an angler anyway, and it fit the conditions the best, which, by the way, were hot, sunny, and calm and stable, which I would generally prefer for largemouth fishing. So, like I said, I didn't catch them. Well, I figured out pretty quick that there were some of them in the cattails, but I already mentioned this whole place is rimmed with cattails, and it's a long, skinny lake, winding lake, where a little valley the valley that had springs in it was flooded when they built the dam at one end of it. So it's a long, skinny lake, meaning it has a lot of shoreline for its size, and all of it looked the same depth range, rimmed with cattails. And so I started working cattails with my beloved Pit Boss on a flipping stick and started pitching cattails, and finally made contact with some bass doing that. Caught a couple of them, including one that was pretty solid, maybe a 3.5 pounder. And I'm like, okay, that's what I need to be doing. So then I settled into that and started really getting after it. Well, long story short, I ended up catching one that was like a 4 pounder. And I'm like, all right, now there's a nice one. Everything's going good. To this point, I've caught 3 fish. I haven't missed anybody. I'm fishing well. Everything's fine. I land that fish. I notice he's got a weird hook in him. He's stuck in the tongue, which I don't generally like. Fortunately, he wasn't bleeding. Which is a bit of a surprise, but I was able to get him and let him go. And I checked my bait. I always do, but I didn't check one particular thing, and that is where my line had slipped around within the eye of the hook and had got caught to where the hook eye basically closes on itself. And so it wasn't in a straight line on the flipping hook that I was throwing. Now, let me take a quarter step back here and say, if you're a bass guy and you're using a straight chain flipping hook, you know the importance of it pulling in a straight line. And in fact, a lot of guys will snell those hooks even, which ensures that no matter what you do, the hook will pull in a straight line. Well, my line had made its way around during the weird fight with this bass that was hooked in the tongue, had made its way around and got hung in the side of the eye of the hook. And it doesn't sound like a big deal. You think, oh, well, that's not a big deal. But when you pull on the hook, it pulls it sideways. And what happened, long story short, was the next 4 fish in a row came off. I'd swing on them and they came off. And I've already mentioned I only caught 3 so far. So now I'm 3 for 7 on putting fish in the boat. So now my confidence is getting bad. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on with that. So I finally figure out, oh man, holy schmoly, my line's all messed up, right? So, and the confidence is very important. And so when I notice that line that's goofy, I cut it off, and I retie, I get a nice clean knot on there. Now my confidence is back. And confidence is very important. And so when you miss multiple fish in a row, is it my timing? Am I swinging wrong? Am I not, what am I doing wrong is the first thing I'm trying to figure out. And it's one of my favorite ways. Pitching, flipping cattails is one of my favorite ways to fish. My tackle's as good as it gets. I got a Fantasista X, it's 7.3, heavy power. I've got a shallow spool Revo SX, perfect for it, 50-pound X5 braid. Everything should be solid. I've got a really good hook, the whole thing, but I missed those fish. So now my confidence is being eroded. I find that goofy knot situation and realize, oh geez, it's pulling the hook sideways. Fix the hook, fix the knot, go back to fish and immediately catch one. Okay, so now things are good. Well, now I'm on a lunch break. I'm good, I've caught another one. We're gonna take a quick lunch break, regroup, change batteries, get our act together and go back. I decide during that lunch break that I'm gonna re-spool about 15 feet of line, remove about 15 feet of line off the end of my line to basically clear up any abrasion from the morning's fishing, and then retie and go from there. And I do that. Well, suddenly I notice when I get back on the water with the boat that my pitching's gone out the window. And this is a reel that I'm not super familiar with just yet. It's a shallow spool. It only holds like 30 yards of line. And the reason is it's specifically designed for flipping. And you don't need more than about 30 feet of line for flipping. So it's a very shallow spool, which makes it great for flipping because it has an excellent free spool, meaning that the bait can be moving very slow and the reel behaves very well, and you don't waste a lot of line. Well, when I took that line off it, all of a sudden it didn't feel right, and I could not make an accurate pitch at all. I couldn't flip, and I couldn't pitch, and I couldn't figure it out. And I went on all frustrated. Well, now my confidence is eroding again, and that's a key part right here, because I'm like, why can I not make an accurate skit or pitch or flip? And I want to point out that I do casting contests. I practice casting a lot. I can cast in a coffee cup at 30 feet. I can cast in a 1 foot circle at 90 feet. And now I can't make this thing work. And I'm thinking, man, this reel is sensitive. Geez, I took 15, 20 feet of line off it and now it doesn't work at all. And so then I ended up taking another break, decide I'm going to replace the line, fill the spool back up. Well, in so doing, I find that I have at some point, probably when I took the rod out of the boat to cut that little bit of line off and retie it, that I had smashed a guide. And I have no idea how I smashed that guide. That's a frustration. I don't know if I stepped on it. I don't know. I have no idea what happened. But one of the guides was smashed flat against the rod. So what happened then is that when I'm trying to cast, it's tension. And so I'm trying to pitch, which doesn't have a lot of lure speed, and it won't work right. And I didn't bother to notice that it was the rod, not the reel. So I'm on the reel finicking, with the brake systems and all this stuff, trying to figure out to get the reel to pitch right. When the reel is fine, it's the rod that's damaged, and I didn't realize it. So when I went to replace that line, I found that the rod was damaged. I bent the guide back straight and went ahead and replaced the line anyway. Well, at that point, it's late in the day, the damage is done. I have missed a whole bunch of fish. I don't make accurate pitches. The wind's coming up. So the fish I missed on hook setting earlier, then the rod getting damaged. Now I'm not making good throws, so I'm not getting bites, blah, blah, blah. The wheels came off, let's just say. Then the wind comes up, ruins that pattern. At the end of the day, you don't catch half as many fish. I'm telling you all of this because most of it was easily avoidable. And when you check after you hook a fish and you let them go, like I did that 4-pounder that was hooked in the tongue, you need to check every aspect of it. And my little pit boss that was on that hook was pushed up over the eye of the hook. And so I didn't notice that the line had made its way around into a really weird 1 in a million position and wrapped the eye of the hook to where it wouldn't pull in a straight line. And I even demonstrated that to my camera guy, like, look at this. And once we figured that out, okay, no problem. My confidence was right back until I found out I couldn't pitch. And now my confidence is gone again. And confidence is a very fragile thing, and it's critical to fishing. So my rhythm,
my patience was tried, and my confidence was gone. And I let it get to me to the point where I got frustrated. So then, once I finally get new line, I get everything squared away, now the wind's up, now I'm frustrated even more because now my pattern's died, and it's the only way I figured out how to catch fish. And by the way, I threw spinner baits and crankbaits and slobber knocker bladed jigs and jerk baits and soft swim baits and a lot of other stuff. And I got one 8-inch bite, maybe 10-inch bite on a spinner bait, and otherwise every single fish I caught was in the cattails. So my point of this is this: when your confidence starts to erode from equipment, inspect every inch of your equipment. I had this happen once before where I had a couple break-offs and I was like, oh my gosh, my line's junk. What is wrong? What is wrong? I replaced the line, broke fish off immediately. This is on a different trip. I found out the hard way that I had missing a guide insert and I didn't know it. It had broken and come out. This was several years ago and I didn't know it. And it was cutting the line on the guide hoop. And again, same scenario. Had I inspected every aspect instead of what I thought was the obvious part, I would have been a lot better off. And at the end of the day, I blamed pulling 15 feet of line off for my reel completely not performing. And it sounds even dumb to say it right this minute, rather than inspecting every little bit of the rod. So my confidence was eroded from equipment failure through no fault of the equipment. It was mishandling in both cases. I didn't check the knot. I didn't check the guides. Therefore, it cost me several fish, several hours of fishing time, and my confidence was eroded. For the record, I got everything squared away, went out the next morning with a fresh mindset, fished for 20 minutes, caught 3 of them, and drove home because it was time to go home. So I had a reset overnight. And the point of that is your confidence catches fish. That's one of my most important sayings. So when your equipment is not giving you what you need, put it away altogether and get a different rod out, even if it means re-rigging. Check every single aspect of your equipment. Don't just check the obvious one. I thought the reel was giving me problems when it was the rod. I thought my timing was wrong on my hook setting when it was really my line was jacked up and my hooks were pulling sideways and I was hooking fish for about 3 seconds and they were coming off. And it was literally an overall situation that I thought was a good thing from confidence and the importance of making sure that all your equipment's in order. My confidence comes from preparation, and preparation should include every aspect of your tackle, not the obvious stuff like check the hook point, bait's fresh, re-rig it, check the line for fraying and go. That's all fine. But if I'd have pulled the bait down a little bit and checked the knot, I would have been fine. As soon as I played with the reel for a minute and that didn't fix something, I should have been looking at the rod, but I didn't. It didn't occur to me that something like that had happened and it was putting tension on the line as it was paying out of the rod. So I let it erode my confidence, and it cost me dearly over the course of a day. And I drove, like I said, 300 miles to go there and film a TV show. So we got it done at the end of the day, but it was very tough. So check your equipment, check all of your equipment, and focus hard on maintaining your confidence, even if it means sitting down in the boat, regrouping, drinking some water, and thinking it through all the way around. Check every aspect of your equipment and go about your business. But your confidence is fragile, but it's also important, and take care of it. Now, I want to address one other thing in this podcast, and it's quick here. I talked to 8 other anglers while I was there. It's a 160-acre lake. Nobody had caught anything. 3 guys that were together said between them they had caught 6 largemouth all summer long. They were astounded that I had caught 3 of them by the time I talked to them in one day. The point of it is, just because you're not catching them doesn't mean they're not there. And I see that a lot with people, even on my home lake. I went walleye fishing. We didn't catch any walleyes. There's no walleyes in there, blah, blah, blah. They need to stock the lake. And then I get in the boat with a biologist, and there's 300 of them in one 75-foot long net. And there's 15 nets around the lake, and all 15 of them are loaded with walleyes. And then you go electric fish with them, and they put 400 walleyes in the boat in 90 seconds with an electric fishing rig. And so my point is this: your data and their data is definitely not the same, and their data is built around non-discriminate equipment. In other words, when we put a gill net out, it's going to catch whatever swims through it if it's the right size for the species we're looking for. If I electrofish, everybody that gets near it's going to pop up, and we're going to find out what's going on. When I set a fish trap, it's indiscriminate. You as an angler, or me as an angler, when I put a lure in the water, now I'm relying on that fish to respond and help me catch him. And that is a completely different beast. And I have sampled with biologists all over the place for many years. So this is why when I get a tip from a biologist that tells me the population of a lake is really good, I listen to them and go. When they told me, a good friend of mine manages lake trout at a place here in Colorado where they were culling lake trout like crazy for a while. He says, we're culling little ones. The population's too big. You mark my words, the state record's going to come out of that lake within 5 years of this project. 3 years later, a world record came out of that lake because he had more data than anglers have. And whether you believe it or not, it's up to you, but I've sampled with them enough to know that their data is not discriminate. It is very good. When this biologist told me there's lots of largemouth in there, but nobody catches them, now I know why nobody catches them. And I also documented that, yeah, there's some really nice largemouth in there, but you got to be on your game to get them. You're going to be pitching 1,000,000 times into the cattails, and they're in there, and they're buried in there. And every single one I caught was backed way back into the cattails to the point where you need to be borderline pro level to catch them. The biologist cannot dictate how those fish behave, only can prove that they're in there. And I proved what he told me. They're in there, and they're in there in reasonable numbers based on the number of bites I got, but they are dang hard to catch, and that's going to be the case in some scenarios. Same thing with the lake trout in the lake I was referencing in Colorado. They're hard to catch, even though there's lots of them in there, because they're well fed, because they culled a bunch of numbers down out of them, and they're very well fed because they have equal amounts of food supply for the fish they have, as opposed to being overpopulated when everybody could catch them easily, but they were stunted and runts, and now they're big ones. So, and at the end of the day, if they let the overpopulation continue, they'll eat themselves out of house and home, meaning they'll erode the food chain, and then they'll all die off. So you got to be a little bit careful when you criticize biologists, because again, their data set is more complete than yours, and this was a very classic example of it. When I told the local guys what the biologists had shared with me about the lake and showed them pictures of the size of the ones I'd already caught, those guys were shocked, and they've been fishing there for years, and they had no idea. And so you as an angler, if you want to get serious, go read the reports that the biologists publish. And in most cases, they are all published for various public bodies of water. I know here in Colorado they are. You can look at the surveys that the biologists have done. You can get access to age and size profiles and the whole 9 yards if you get online and dig it up. And I do that routinely before we go film. In this case, I didn't have to because I ran into the biologist randomly and he told me where to go or told me what lake to go visit. I did so, and I see why nobody catches them there. So I learned a bunch of lessons on this one, really about your confidence and the importance of it, about your equipment and the importance of it, and in this particular case, the ability to make extremely accurate casts with lots of line control. In no case of all the fish I caught was the lure. I've already looked at the footage. The lure was never in the water more than about 5 seconds before it got bit. In other words, I pitch, doink, it's bit immediately, and you either hook them or you don't. And that's the whole shooting match, because they were in a foot of water. They're either going to bite it or they're not, and they're back in the cattails. And that's just how it went. So accuracy and line control, once again, I've been beating that drum my entire career. Accuracy and line control was the only way to catch them on this particular trip. So I appreciate you guys watching. Hopefully, like myself, you learn from your tough outings as well. I always feel like I learn more when I get my butt kicked than I do when I go and kick their butt, because I analyze the crap out of it, because my company's called Fishful Thinker for a reason. I spend a 6-hour drive on the way home thinking about how I managed to let my confidence get eroded like crazy doing something I love to do simply by overlooking some simple tackle things that I didn't look at all the way around. So again, I appreciate you watching. If you want to join the conversation, Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok, and especially the YouTube channel, those are all at Fishful Thinker. We'd appreciate you subscribing to that YouTube channel. Maybe share it with your friends. That's super important to us. And also check us out on Altitude Sports and World Fishing Network. So thanks for listening. This has been Fishful Thinker, the podcast.